Greetings and welcome to this Ivey Impact live session, Beyond ChatGPT, Integrating AI for Measurable Business Results. My name is Fredrik Odegaard. I'm a faculty member here at the Ivey Business School, and it is my great pleasure and honor to host this panel discussion with two formidable leaders, but not only have deep AI expertise, but who also are fully immersed in the Canadian, quote-unquote, AI-driven industrial revolution. We have Leila Pishdad, who currently is the machine learning research team lead at RBC Borealis AI. RBC Borealis AI is the AI and data-driven innovation center within RBC that focuses on advancing all aspects of financial services through AI, data, and technology. Since graduating with her doctorate degree from McGill University in 2015, Leila has held several technical AI roles at various companies, including Samsung and RBC, and now RBC Borealis AI. Welcome, Dr. Pishdad, and look forward to hearing more about your numerous AI projects. We also have Seamus Blackmore, who recently joined Trudell Medical Limited as their Chief Technology Officer and Vice President. Trudell Medical Limited is a medical manufacturing firm that is headquartered right here in London, Ontario. I'm so extra happy to showcase local firms at the cutting edge of technology and innovation. Prior to joining Trudell Medical, Seamus was a partner at KPMG, assisting clients with AI and technology implementations. And prior to KPMG, he was with Deloitte Digital. And prior to that, Seamus has a long and prolific history in the AI and computer space, including his own IT consulting services companies. Truly delighted to have you here, Seamus, and look forward to hear some of the tales, adventures, and endeavors you have had over the past 20 plus years in the space. Welcome. Let me preface by framing and providing context of this session. Artificial intelligence, AI, is of course a very broad term and spans everything from robots in manufacturing to self-driving cars and smart home devices to online algorithms such as those used in airline pricing, route generation, streaming recommendations, and so on. Therefore, to focus the discussion, I would like to concentrate on the most recent development within AI that is known as generative AI or Gen AI. Furthermore, I'd like to mainly focus on Gen AI applications to management and business decisions. In other words, focus more on the knowledge economy and less on sort of technical robots and gadgets. The session will be divided into two parts. First, I'm going to lead a panel discussion with Leila and Seamus with a focus on 1, capabilities and value add of Gen AI, 2, how to implement Gen AI, and lastly, 3, what personal and professional development should people pursue in order to succeed in a Gen AI business environment. Then following the panel discussion, I will field some of the questions you might have, and so feel free to submit any questions you would like to hear Leila's and Seamus' thoughts on. We obviously will not be able to get to all questions, but I hope to at least cover some of the recurring themes among the questions. Now then, before we get started, I would like to run 2 quick polls. Let's see if my team can help me here. So we have a first question here. I'd like audience members to feel free to contribute to. Poll 1, to what extent do you use Gen AI tools, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Claude, so on, professionally or personally? And we have a couple of options: daily, weekly, monthly, tried it 1 to 3 times, and never used any of them. And I don't know if we will be okay, I'll read the second question too, and then we'll get to the results. The second poll is, what overall social and economic impact will Gen AI have on the Canadian economy over the next 5 years? Is it going to be very large and positive, moderately positive, marginal, moderately negative, very large and negative? All right, let's see. I will give a few seconds or minutes here to get some response rates in here. Maybe I'll take 1 more second. And okay, so at least I'm hoping that this is being shared as well. We see there seems to be quite a few people, about 1/3 almost, using it daily, and about 1/3 perhaps using it weekly. So I would call that very frequently, and a little bit less monthly. And then there's maybe a remaining 1/3 or so that have either never used it or tried it once or twice. And I will say that is quite the dramatic change from over the last even year. I think even a year ago, you would have more on the perhaps never used it and tried it once or maybe monthly. But to actually see that people are using it daily and weekly, that's incredible to see. Okay. if we scroll down to the second one here, let me just see if I can go on. So what overall impact? Okay, so some people are quite bullish. That's going to be very large and positive. Maybe most people, over half, at least 57%, are saying that it's going to be moderately positive. Some marginal, and then we have a few more on the negative side there, not too big, and a few. And again, I think that has been a quite big shift over the last couple of years, in particular since when ChatGPT first came out in the fall of 2022, where there was a big sort of fear of, oh, how is it going to replace our jobs and so on. And I think now we're seeing a lot more on the positive side. So great, thanks for sharing your responses there with us. Well, without further ado, let's get straight into it. So welcome, Seamus and Leila. How are you guys doing?
Very well. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, well, thanks for taking time off to speak to us here. So, yeah. I think we will start here on the sort of capabilities and the value add by Gen AI. And it's sort of a broad question. I was hoping you can maybe share some of the use cases or success stories that you have been part of or seen. So sort of a general question is, what are some of the applications or use cases of Gen AI that you have been involved with? And also if you can touch a little bit on how they have added value to the organization. Seamus, maybe I start with you and then I'll turn it over to Leila afterwards. So.
Certainly. In my previous position at KPMG, I certainly had the opportunity to work with many different clients, very large organizations, governments, on their AI strategy. And a huge part of that was always defining the use cases. And one thing that always struck me is that with every group, you could spend maybe 2-3 hours. You'd always end up with at least 100 use cases, dozens, usually 100 more. And that's really exciting because people know that they want to use this and they have their ideas. But the thing that always struck me is that most people focus on the things that they used to do that they can automate. And that's what you would see with the anxiety about, oh, I'm going to lose my job because we're going to automate all the jobs. But the most exciting stuff with the Gen AI, for me, are things that were impossible and now are possible. So some really great examples that I've seen that are in development. This is very new technology, but that are being developed with clients that I've worked with in the past and with my current company. One would be something like sales at scale. So could you imagine if you were a company that was trying to reach a market, if you could individually look up on LinkedIn, Facebook, any kind of public information, literally every potential client in your domain, build a unique marketing plan to that person, a communication plan to that person, draft the email, the LinkedIn message, whatever it would be, and then begin a communication channel with them at scale, and even begin negotiation in some cases. So where you don't even have a person in the sales mode until the very end where you have to close the deal. I think that's something that simply wouldn't have been possible a couple of years ago, but I've had it happen to me. I was on LinkedIn and I could tell that this company was using Gen AI to read my profile and figure out who I am and the best way to sell to me. So it's coming, it exists, and the smart companies are implementing that now.
That's incredible. That's really, really fascinating. And if I just to maybe go back there, because usually, as you said before, that we tend to focus on the capabilities that we have now. And so in every sort of technology advancement, it's always the current applications or the current content is always the former content. So like when movies came out, the content was the theaters, and when theater came out, it was the stories that were told. And so we always sort of just use the new mood. But here it seems that actually in this, it's a true revolution in that we're actually creating new content or new applications or new capabilities that it wasn't like, oh, we had this capability before. I think that's actually quite fascinating.
Absolutely. And I would say that most people would have dreamed of having that. I mean, meet a salesperson who wouldn't dream of having automatic lead generation of every potential client in their domain. So it's not that idea didn't exist. It was that it was actually impossible. And now it's very possible. It's not even that complicated.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I'm going to come back to you, Seamus, about if there was a measurable value add, but I'd first like to maybe bring Leila into the discussion here and hear if one of your stories or use cases, applications that you've been involved with.
Sure, yeah. Of course, generative AI has revolutionized everything. I do agree with Seamus that some of the things that were impossible are now made possible. Also, some of the very challenging tasks or very time-consuming tasks have become much simpler, much easier, and less time consuming. One of the use cases that we have currently is the advice center. So basically trying to help the advice center to get the right answer within the reasonable amount of time to the client, have better processes, and help the client with their needs.
Okay.
This used to be done by going through a lot of different very complex policies, a lot of different documents that had to be looked at and checked. Now with generative AI, we have the capability to help the advisor get the right answer within a shorter time to the client, and also help them navigate the different products that they could be eligible for, or they could be interested in. We still have the human in the loop, and I think we do touch on some of the challenges to make sure that the answers are correct, and also the client is heard by a human being on the other side. But this has really improved the efficiency of the advisor, has really simplified their lives, and has helped our clients get to the answers that they need much faster.
So similar to what Seamus was saying, this thing about personalization, that you can target a personal response and this strategy for your clients.
Yeah, this one is more on, I would say, information retrieval, if you want the jargon. But yeah, a similar thing. Basically, you have a client coming and asking for something. Formerly, that advisor had to have read all of these policies. Of course, they are still doing that, but they can get the answer right away. So something like, we Google now for some, if we used to Google for some information, now a lot of us use, ChatGPT or other, generative AI capabilities. Think of something similar, but to do the search on RBC policies and, products.
Okay, great. So maybe I'll follow up then on sort of the value add, and is it possible to sort of quantify what that contributes to the bottom line, like either on the cost savings or time savings or revenue boost and so on? So Leila, maybe I'll start with you here. So with that use case, were you guys able to track some sort of performance on that or the value add on it?
I think the most direct one is the time that is saved by advisors. That's the most direct one. The less direct ones are client engagement, so how happy they are after the conclusion of a conversation. But for sure, this use case has shown a lot of value. Yeah.
And did you have was it, I don't know, 10%, 20%, like what, do you have a percentage of the time that they were able then to speed things up with or something?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just curious.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
But it is one of the very promising projects, so I can say that. And also for advisors, because we have such big client base, even the smallest amount of time that is saved is a lot.
Okay.
So, but unfortunately, I don't have the percentage. I wish.
That's okay. That's right. Let's see if Seamus. I'll say Seamus, on that example that you brought up there in the beginning of the sales, sort of personalized sales channels, or what do you want to call it? Do you have some metric or measurement of what the value add it generates is?
I'm going to do the politician moment here and answer a question you didn't ask. So I would first say that measurement is the most important aspect of this AI experimentation. And the number one thing I try to coach every client on: what are you going to try and measure before you build? What are your prediction, like any experiment? What's your hypothesis? And then can you actually measure it? So in the case of the sales generation, you can see something like 10, 20% easily. It depends on how you implement it. I have a better example, which is from this morning. We have several companies within the Trudell space, and one of the presidents said, "Hey, I have this idea about maybe summarizing RFPs. They're an RFP-based organization." I said, "Well, you know what? Maybe go a step further. Why don't you actually have this thing know every RFP that comes into existence, read it, summarize it, draft a response, and then measure the success of the RFPs, from a quality perspective, from opportunity cost." And he came to me and said, "Well, I've been told by our CEO that, we have other priorities." I said to him, "Well, this is really simple. measure what you think the opportunity cost is at a revenue level and what the margin loss is from those and the quality. And then when we stack them against those other 100 AI use cases, because it's a very generalizable use case, I bet you it's going to be in the top 2 or 3. An hour later, I was talking to the CEO and mentioned this use case. Said, hey, can we do that right away? How quickly can you have that on my desk? So it's all about measurement and understanding who's going to invest in that AI, what measurements they care about. In this case, it'd be revenue or margin, but yeah.
Okay. Good, thank you. Maybe I will ask, we're going to get to implementation later, but so there's some value add from it. Are you able to share maybe what the cost side were with these implementations?
Sure. I can go first.
Go for it. Yeah, thanks.
I like to think of the costs in different buckets. There's the actual cost of the implementation. Then there's the cost of the models, and then there's the cost of the management. So like the managed services kind of cost, right? Okay. And those can come from a lot of different areas. Implementation at the moment is very expensive. And in fact, I've worked with a few of the banks, Leila, although you and I haven't crossed paths before. They're paying for large firms like my ex-firm, KPMG, or they have a research institute within their organization, huge number of bodies. So the implementation costs at the moment are very, very high, simply because this is a new technology. And so the skill set hasn't really become widespread. Although if you compare this year to last year, there's definitely an exponential growth in terms of skill, and the demand is obvious. So I wouldn't worry too much about the implementation costs today. Those are coming down dramatically. I'll give you a concrete example. A year ago, to get your own local LLM running, you had to almost be Leila. You'd have to have a PhD and computer science and know how to spin up the right resources and everything else. You can actually do a one-click install of a local LLM now. And so really the level of skill set has come down dramatically, and that's only going to continue. The other costs, though, are very measurable. It's the cost for the token or the cost for the hardware. Okay. You can get access to like an H100 on something like RunPod for $2-3 an hour US, and that can handle many tokens per second.
Could I just ask you, Seamus, to maybe give a non-technical word of what was that you mentioned there?
Yeah. So these new models, they're basically gigantic multipliers. That's really what they are. They do multiplication at scale, and the hardware that runs the multipliers are hard to come by. There's been a big demand on getting the hardware. That's why anybody who invested in NVIDIA a few years ago is a very happy person today. So that kind of hardware, there's a subset of them, and there's new players entering the field, but it's hard to get. So the best way to get it is usually through some kind of service, AWS, Azure, whatever. And those have an hourly rate or a rate that you basically rent the infrastructure for, or they can do per token like ChatGPT does. There's a lot of different business models. They're going to figure out how to get the most out of you as a user, but it's not as expensive as you may think. So if you wanted to get some of these GPUs, they're usually in the dollars per hour, right? Okay. So if you're an organization and you want to run your own, it's not this. I've had clients who think this is going to be cloud 2.0, and they spent gazillions on cloud, and now they're having a panic attack that they're going to have to ask for the same budget again, times 2. Yeah. In my own experience, that's not the case. And in fact, in the last 2 years, we've seen sometimes 10x reduction in cost. Okay. And the curve is just going down. It's very quickly becoming commoditized, and it's extremely competitive. So I wouldn't worry so much on the operating cost. It's the build cost that for me is significant right now.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that, but let me first hear Leila. Can you talk a little bit about on the cost side of that use case that you just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. So of course there is the people cost, as Seamus was mentioning. The skill set is very sought after, so a lot of interest. There is the computation cost. For our organization, we have to be very careful with the data that we have. So we have to, generally speaking, we have to use on-premise services. Just because it's regulation, we have to really safeguard the client information. And then there is also all of the costs related to privacy and making sure that We are not, there is no information leakage and things like that. For us, for the computation, we do have our own on-premise, what we call GPU cluster. So that's what basically what Seamus was referring to. So giant, let's say, multipliers for doing matrix calculations. And the people cost, again, fortunately, because we, as part of RBC Borealis, we do have a research center. We did have a skill set. It's more like, putting some of the people on these projects, but we didn't have to go through hiring as aggressively as some of the other organizations have to do, at least.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll throw this number out to you, and I'll see how that resonates. So me and a few of my colleagues, we're involved also with an AI project where we're using these, building our own large language model and using for different types of applications within research. And so we just bought a computer, some super fancy, and it does have NVIDIA chips in it. And it was $85,000 for the hardware itself. And then, of course, we're going to use mostly open source software. But then the time is, of course, yes, you have 4 people with PhDs who are now going to be devoting the time on it. So I don't know, does that reflect on the hardware side of a cost, Leila? Would that be something, or Seamus? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I would say that yes, although most people are not going. It's great. On-prem is back. So Leila is right. It's so exciting that we've come completely full circle to back to basically mainframes and on-prem again. But yes, on-prem is back, and a lot of people will be buying the hardware. But I don't know that that's the default use case.
Okay.
So researchers and organizations like RBC are for sure going to be very, very concerned about the data, and on-prem is going to be a big part of what they do. I'd say most of them are going to do hybrid. They'll figure out what use cases they can just do as a service through ChatGPT, which ones they can do as a service through some kind of cloud GPU rental, and then which ones need to be on-prem. When you do on-prem, you do end up usually having capital cost, which is what you're talking about. And you're right, that's in the ballpark. Like, the hardware is expensive, although it's coming down. It really is. There was a glut of production. It reminds me of Cisco in the 90s. So NVIDIA is, a lot of people have talked about, is NVIDIA the next Cisco? And there's so many parallels, because the routers were really expensive when we were trying to ramp up internet, and there was a big demand. And now the GPUs are really expensive because we're trying to ramp up the capacity to do all of the matrix multiplication. So it definitely tracks, but it's not the focus. For me, the focus is the people cost.
Okay.
Because if you want a team of 5 researchers, and they're high demand researchers, it's a couple $100,000 at least in Canada, after total cost of ownership for that kind of employee. So you got $1 million a year right there, easy. And then you're saying, well, my hardware was $80,000, and you can amortize your hardware. So a lot of financial people probably on the line. So you're going to get a lot of value out of that hardware, and you're going to get direct return out of that. Whereas the people cost, it's sort of like a one-off that you got to do to get everything up and running. So it definitely takes a business mind to understand where the costs are.
Let's continue on the implementation, and Leila, maybe I'll continue on you. So if you're thinking about implementing Gen AI, and I want to if you can comment on maybe some of what I would call the soft issues, like the types of business tasks you can do, and the ethical aspects, and the organizational values, and the people side of things, versus the hard things, such as can you measure about what data is required, and so on. So how should you go about thinking about automating a business task or Gen AI, or implementing a Gen AI application in your organization? Leila, could you maybe provide a roadmap of, here's sort of a recipe, here's the steps you should think about?
I think I would maybe first start with the limitations. We have to understand where we can and where we cannot use some of the Gen AI tools that are available. Privacy is definitely an issue. There are also things about, sometimes the machine, the language it uses may not be appropriate. So regulatory and reputational risks are always there. If you don't,
can I just pause one second? What do you mean by language? The language
like,
issue?
for example, if the output, the generated output is extremely biased, or if there is hallucinations with these generative AI models, right? So if the hallucination gives misinformation, that could lead to reputational risk, that could lead to regulatory, issues. There is the human aspect of it. So one thing for us, for example, is that nobody likes to be talking to a machine when they're really looking for customer service, right? Mm-hmm. So there are things like that. And also the data, you have to be careful which data you're allowed to, how you have to really safeguard the data. I think it's really important to understand these limitations. It's important to understand the limitations of the model. The hallucination is a big thing. And thinking about how we can mitigate these, and then how we can use how we can have the use case. I think the people, we have to have enough investment in the people to make sure that, once they are given the computational resources, they can carry out the task. And then understanding the problem, making sure we have the right metrics to measure the value added.
So can I just, if you could illustrate on that, the issue of hallucination and that use case that you brought up earlier about the, if I understand it correctly, the financial advising aspect of it. Like what were some of the examples that came up there, and how did you overcome those limitations there?
I can maybe give some high level examples. Like for example, if there is if for example you're talking with a chatbot, no human in the loop, and the chatbot is telling you that you can get this financial product for this rate and it's completely off. Or if they tell you that if you do this and this and that, you can get these promotional offers, which could be untrue. Or it could be adding some of the biases that shouldn't be there, things like that. I don't know if I...
No, that's perfect. And then, so what were the steps necessary to sort of fix that? How do you go about fixing that?
For us, I think the biggest part is that we still have the human in the loop to make sure that we mitigate some of these risks. The most important thing is that the client still wants to talk to a human, and they have to be able to have the human. It's just that we're assisting that advisor.
Right. So it's more, it's on the, you want to augment or assist the user rather than completely automate or replace. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And then the other thing is, of course, making sure, so we have to keep everything on premise to make sure that there's no leakage of information. We can't use off-the-shelf models. We have to have our own tuning of the model to make sure that it's more appropriate. And
Okay. Thanks.
I would expand on Leila's one, because I talked to a different bank about one of these use cases, and they wanted to do something eventually where the customer would directly have access to the model to ask questions and things like that. And I asked, what are you going to do if the model, if the customer asks, what branch should they go to? And let's imagine this is RBC, and the model says, oh yeah, you actually should go downtown and go into the TD branch. They give better service, right? Yeah. So a big part of the fine tuning, aspect there around brand risk and things like that. The model could say anything. It really could. And it's basing its knowledge, the general bots are, on what's just on the internet or what's in some random database. And if your organization is underrepresented, this could be a very real risk. So it's a funny example, but it's very possible.
And so what Seamus, how would you go about then fixing that? Or how do you go about ensuring that,
the most important thing in using AI today is just to understand what problems it's good at and what problems that you probably should avoid. And the pitfalls are very, very, very high risk. So cybersecurity or privacy issues or you name it. Mm-hmm. And I feel a little bit like it's like blockchain. And you could probably find a lot of people with a lot of blockchain experience who pivoted to AI. I might even be one of them. But the point is, when these new technologies come out, everybody just dives in and say, oh, how do I solve this problem with Gen AI? But the solution for 90% of the problems you're trying to solve, 99%, is not Gen AI. It's the traditional technologies that you already have. So you think about authentication and authorization and your cyber stuff and your privacy stuff and all the policies you generally have, those apply. those do not get forgotten. Let's keep using those. In the case of the customer bot, the answer is not to use a customer bot yet, directly. because it's so easy to use prompt injection, which is where you sort of trick the bot into getting it to say something very embarrassing or very rude or you name it as an organization. So that's going to come, but that is a very unsolved problem, honestly, at this point.
So it sounds like the first step is to figure out, like, okay, what kind of tasks or what is it that I would like it to do? And so, like, when you engage, Leila, internally with an RBC, when you get, internally, client wants to do some sort of AI implementation, or what's your first question you ask them then? Like, how do you guide them down the steps that are needed? What's your first question?
I think my first question is, what are the metrics? What are we trying to optimize for? What is the information that we have? For the advice centers, for example, one thing is that we do tune so it's not that we use an off-the-shelf model. Questions like that, can we use the off-the-shelf model, or do we have to do fine-tuning on top of the model? And then what are we optimizing for? I think that's...
And I would guess that everybody wants to say, well, we're optimizing for profit.
How do we measure the profit?
Okay.
What is the direct performance metric that we're optimizing for? Like, for example, the profit, is it faster responses? Is it more accurate responses? How much error are we allowed to have?
Okay.
Things like that.
All right, so now we got that question out of the way. Then what's your second question? Like, what's the next phase in this dialogue that you keep with them?
What is the timeline? I think that's the other question.
Okay.
So how much time do we have to? Yeah. I think that's...
I want it tomorrow.
Do we have enough? Yeah, I guess that's then the investment.
I want it this afternoon, preferably, I guess, is I want it now.
ChatGPT.com.
Yeah.
Log in.
Okay.
Then I think you have to make compromises. I think it's important for the partner to understand, what is the timeline, how much you can gain in the time that you have with the metrics that you have and with the other resources that you have access to.
Okay, so maybe, just to get the viewers and listeners to have a reasonable expectation, what would be a reasonable expectation in an implementation? Like, how long would it take?
It depends.
Maybe I'll start with you, Leila, or Seamus.
It depends on what problem you're trying to solve.
Okay.
So when we were saying, the number one thing is AI good at this? A lot of the Gen AI specifically, a lot of the table stakes problems are very well understood, and there's a lot of people working on them. So if you're trying to do something in a call center space or something in finance departments or something in sales, almost every company on earth has somebody thinking about that problem. And so there's a lot of community knowledge built up around it. So it's oftentimes you're just implementing a recipe of some kind. Maybe you do have to, download an open source model and then fine tune it. So it takes TD out of the vernacular of an RBC model. Yeah. Maybe you have to do that. But those kinds of things can actually be a lot simpler if there's a known recipe. If you're trying to build something like what you're doing, Fredrik, like where you want to build your own LLM for some unique task in your industry that truly is either new IP or it's just something that hasn't been solved yet. Now you're into a research project, and this is something that's going to take quite a bit longer. And the big, maybe 6 months to a year, whereas implementing a recipe could be a month. But the biggest problem is not getting the model to actually answer the way you want it to. It's actually deploying it to production. Okay. And in an organization such as RBC, that's a challenging problem, because you make the model do what you want, and now you have to go through all of the regulatory considerations and the privacy. And Leila, please jump in and talk about your experience trying to get something to production.
Leila, can you?
I agree that taking things to production for a bank, of course, you always have the regulatory challenges. Okay. You have to make sure that things, you have to make sure that there's no data leakage, there's no issues with, you have to make sure that you safeguard the information that you have to safeguard, and also you are really serving the clients better, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So let me just see if I take a hypothetical, what I would assume to be a relatively simple implementation. Like, let's suppose you wanted to have some sort of Gen AI auto response to client requests, right? Or an online chatbot. So I mean, the chatbots a company might have on their website is historically it's basically a lookup menu. So you look up, if they say this, then respond with this, and if they say this, the hard part is that when they don't say exactly what you have prompted it. But now with the Gen AI, you can have a dialogue. So suppose a company would like to have just a web chatbot up and running. Can you guys give a ballpark figure of how long an implementation like that might take?
I can jump in if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
That's probably the example I wouldn't do. So, but the process of building
why? Because of the hallucination, that you're afraid that it's going to be saying a lot of crazy
hallucination
stuff about your
and
company?
also prompt injection. And there's a lot of really great examples, public examples, where this has been a total disaster. Air Canada had a famous one. There was a truck company who somebody tricked it into offering a deal to sell a truck for $1. I mean, there's so many, and prompt injection truly is not solved. Like, that is a very tough problem. So public-facing models for a company are risky, but if you're not asking me about what can you do, if you're asking, about what should you do, about what can you do and how long, you could get a chatbot up and running on a website in a day. I mean, that is not that complicated, because the recipe isn't very difficult. You could either use one of the APIs from ChatGPT or from Claude or from any of these, or you could just download an open source one through Ollama and get it up and running on a web server and integrate it into your website. Or there are tons of startups who have sort of wrapped all that up into an easy install. If you've got a WordPress site, for example, I guarantee you, I have not looked, but I guarantee you, if you look, somebody has made a plugin for a ChatGPT bot. So the should is the much harder question than the can in this scenario. If you wanted to do that properly, where you truly tested everything and you deployed it properly, I would be very thorough. I'd be many, many, many months before I was sure that I would do something like that.
I see. So it's more on, so getting a prototype up and running, but you want to make sort of the validation and the checking, that process could take a couple of months maybe. So
certainly.
Yeah. Leila, is that sort of consistent with your...
I totally agree with that. It's very different if you do a student type of project, ad hoc, let's say my free time project, just to test out prompting, just to test out, the API and things like that. And when you compare that to deploying a product that is going to be client-facing and serving people, that would require a lot of time, especially for an application such as that. I think there is some fine-tuning that is involved to, fine-tune based on the business that the company has. There's a lot of checks on privacy. There's a lot of checks to make sure, we deal with hallucination as much as we could. Yeah, that would definitely take much longer.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're going to do one more set here before we open up for some of the questions that have been trickling in. And I want to ask now, I'm in the education space. I try to prepare people for the job market. And with Gen AI, there was one of the first concerns was, of course, it was going to replace jobs. Seems that has a little bit subsued, so we're not quite as alarmed about that yet. But what would you say is how should you prepare for the future, basically? Either if you're in a current position and you're working and you want to sort of, further your career, or if you are, as the people that I interact with, the students, and you're trying to prepare for entering the job market, how should you sort of prepare yourself or enhance yourself to use these Gen AI tools and Gen AI market? Where do I go? I go with, Leila, if you can please start.
So there are a lot of tutorials that are available. I'm more familiar on the technical ones. For example, there is Hugging Face. It has a lot of tutorials, and there is different tutorials for different APIs for Llama, for ChatGPT.
Could you just, what did you call that one? The Hug? What did you say it was?
Hugging Face, Hugging Face. Yeah, it has a pretty nice logo too. It's a Hugging Face, basically, So there are some tutorials that are available online. There are ML conferences that usually have tutorials as well. Those are usually deeper and more technical. There are, let's say, more application-based conferences that could serve that purpose too.
Okay.
I maybe also shamelessly advertise our website here. RBC Borealis has some tutorials as well.
Of course, great.
Yeah, pretty well written. But yeah, there are many different sources. There is also a newsletter that I follow. I think it's Alpha News or something. So anyways, so you can sign up for different newsletters. And X now, or formerly Twitter, I still follow some of the scientists. They have some good tweets or papers, white papers. Yeah.
So this is more on the very technical sort of computer science aspect of it. Do I understand it correctly?
More or less, yeah. I think most of the tutorials yeah.
Okay. Seamus, what advice would you have to either people in the job who are currently working and want to, prolong their career and advance their career versus the ones who are coming into the job market?
Well, I will say this is really funny because if you remember, Fredrik, we were having a drink at the bottom of a ski hill. We talked about where do I get my research, and I said, okay, so mostly on X. And you're like, is that true? So we have a second confirmation. That's my favorite place by far, because this is the fastest moving I've ever seen any technology in terms of advancement.
Okay.
And you just cannot keep on top of it. I mean, I really do try to keep my finger on the pulse. And sometimes I'll be 2 or 3 months behind one of my peers. And I thought I knew like what the latest was. And they said, no, I have this white paper that can quantize or whatever you want, the technical stuff. But I would actually talk about the non-technical for a second.
Yeah.
I've done so many of these education sessions with companies when I was at KPMG. And the most important thing I can say to folks is, number one, use it. So when we did that poll, the idea that even if it's not that great yet, you should be using it just from a skill perspective, because you need to learn what it's good at, what it's not good at, when it lies to you. And then the second piece of advice is use it in your domain. I would say that everybody who has a specialty, whether they're in the finance department or HR or IT or you name it, they don't need to know everything AI can do. But it is straight up neglect at this point if you are running a department and you don't know what AI can do in your department. There's no reason for that at this point. That is very much like I always tell everybody, don't be Sears. That's my favorite. I think you heard me say that before. So if you think of the internet and people who intentionally did not take their business onto the internet, and there's many examples where there's dramatic failure and implosion of companies, take that to a micro level. You should at least know what's happening in your domain with AI. And it should take you probably an hour to figure that out. So it's not too much to ask. Use the thing to get used to it and spend an hour or so to figure out what the use cases are in your domain. And guess what? You can do both at once, because if you put in ChatGPT, what are the use cases in finance or what are the use cases in whatever, it's going to give you a great list. So
I see.
That's my number one recommendation, is learn what's useful in your domain.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's see if we can tackle some of the questions that have been coming in. I'm going to start with, there's one general theme, and it's all about like sort of ethics and bias. And Leila, you already talked about it too, Seamus, but maybe it's a general question. What are your perspectives on the ethical challenges with Gen AI? Seamus, what's sort of your general take?
I think the subset of the science called AI alignment is where most of my interest is in that space, but there are so many ethical considerations. The hardest problems with AI are not technical at all, to tell you the truth. It's how do you get the world to accept this and use it properly? When I think of implementing, and I do this a lot, when I try to use a model from Silicon Valley, it always comes with their value system pre-baked into the model. And sometimes it simply won't even answer questions because it just doesn't want to go down that road, whether it's a valid question or not. And so I work in the healthcare space primarily. And if I want to ask something about like patient information, it'll just say, no, I don't even want to go there. So one of the first things I always do with a model is try and find out, can I basically remove the bias from the model in some way? There's a lot of really great papers on that specific topic. I think it's going to be really interesting where I think most companies are going to even have maybe a new department or at least a new set of policies where they define their value system and try and bring that to each AI use case. So you don't just take Microsoft's value system. You don't take Google's value system. That's what comes default with the model. But you figure out how can we actually align whatever we're using to our company's value system. And for the most part, then you don't have to, you're still going to have some ethical quandaries, but for the most part, those quandaries will go away because they're going to be the same ethical quandaries that you already face in your organization. You don't want racial bias. You don't want gender bias. You don't want all of these things that you've already made value statements probably as an organization. You just have to figure out how do I get that onto the use case and make sure that the model follows that.
I see. Okay. Leila, what are your broad or comments on the ethical challenges within GI?
I think there are also, I think I would just add maybe a couple of items to what Seamus was saying. There is IP issues. We have seen instances where the model memorizes the data and, just repeats basically leads into plagiarism. There is privacy. Of course, we have to be very careful when there is client information. Basically, I think the safest way is not to share anything that is sensitive on the cloud, but that's a probably different topic. And then there are all the issues with hallucination, problems with reasoning. We have to understand what the model is capable at and what they're not. A lot of times it seems like the responses have some reasoning, but truly a lot of these models, at least the majority of them, this is still, let's say, a research in ML to add reasoning and planning to some of these answers. So we have to be very careful with these things as well, and how much control you have on the output, things like, biases and all of that. There is a framework that can be used, a responsible AI framework. They will check for things like fairness and things different things like that. But that I would say that's an active area of research within ML to bake all of these things into the model.
So let me just follow up because we have come back to this issue of hallucination a couple of times. And I think, so first of all, let's maybe just be concrete about what we're talking about. It's like when you ask a prompt like ChatGPT for a response, and it makes up an answer that is not correct, or just it can make up a name or a field or whatever, it just completely makes up. Now, on the one hand, you might think, okay, that's a bug. It's something we have to fix. But on the other hand, that is part of its inherent creative, the generative aspect of creatively generating new content. And so is it a feature or is it a bug, the hallucination aspect of it? Seamus, I'll start with you perhaps. Sure.
It's funny, this might be one of the most originally difficult questions because it's like a subset of incompleteness theorem. So for all the math nerds out there, you can't simultaneously make a bot that can answer any question and generate any answer while also telling it can't do certain things, like it can't lie to you, it can't not be creative, all these things. So it's sort of, you're asking it to be more than one thing at the same time, and you end up with this kind of paradox. And it is definitely not a bug. If you want to use ChatGPT to write a story, for example, the opposite side of the coin for lying and dishonesty is creativity. They're very similar, just depends on the context, right? So there are different things you can do. You can tweak some of the parameters of the model to try and make it be more strict. You can use things like RAG, which is a retrieval augmented generation, I believe is the acronym. But it's a add-on around the model that allows it to go and get the information to say, okay, I'm going to find the information first, and I'm going to stick to this context, and it's going to allow me to at least figure out, is there a reference for what I said, and can it be checked? There's all sorts of things you can do around the edges. One of the things I like to think about, because I've said before, trying to understand what it's good at and what it's bad at. It's extremely good at needle and haystack kind of problems. So if you're searching for a needle and you as a person can verify that it is a needle once it finds it, then it's a great problem. So in the In the case of the RBC advisor, they're looking for advice. That's the needle. You have a huge plethora of knowledge. You want this tiny bit of domain knowledge. It finds it for you, gives you an answer, and then you can verify that that's a needle, that you have actually found it. So those problems, it's really good at. You don't have to worry about hallucination as much. When it's a generic problem, that's not a needle and haystack problem. So, for example, generate an email and then send it for a new client lead. The very first use case I gave you, super dangerous at a brand risk perspective, right? Because it's not a needle and haystack example of a problem. It's like it's total automation. So yeah, I would say that hallucination is not a bug. It's definitely much part of the system.
Yeah,
but you have to figure out how to go around it and work with it, right?
Yeah. Leila, do you have any other comments on that?
I think it's how the model is built, basically a language model generalizing the concept. So you're trying to predict what is the most probable word or what is the most probable token. So hallucination could be a part of that. I think it's the human in the loop that matters a lot. So if I use ChatGPT, let's say personally, if I use ChatGPT to write an email, I should still look over the email and make sure that it's okay. If I, even for the information retrieval, if I use it, I still have to make sure I still have to go over it to make sure that it's correct. So if I am using it for something that I have no knowledge about, I'd be very, very cautious. Okay. But if I am, let's say, for example, using it to review something that I'm already familiar with, it's okay because I will take a look. So I think I would use it to augment our knowledge at this point, not to generate knowledge with no feedback. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think just from my own perspective as how it has affected in the teaching environment, I think when computers come out, we change our vocabulary. Like, so people now use the word delete. You don't say erase or remove or take away. You say, oh, delete that, or instead of that. And the same thing now with hallucination. It's like when my students write something and it's wrong, I don't write, oh, this is wrong. I write, oh, I think you're hallucinating at this point, actually. So I think just if there's at least changed the way we, think about responses. Oh no, that's not a lie. That's a hallucination. So. Let's take maybe one more question here, and then we're soon approaching our end. I think the question is about what's next. Where is it going? What's going to be perhaps Gen AI 2.0? Where do you see the space going, either within your organization or sort of more broadly outside? Leila, I'll start with you. What's the next thing with Gen AI?
I think in terms of machine learning research, for me, it's planning and reasoning, adding planning and reasoning.
Okay, and can you maybe illustrate with an example?
Yeah, sure. So we can now see, like you have to make sure that, and that helps with the hallucination too, right? So things like understanding and adding that structure rather than predicting what is the next probable word, predicting because I have this predicate, what would be the conclusion? So adding that, and also what we call, again, in terms of machine learning, what is called as planning. So if you have the steps, then how would you go around and, have the plan to, let's say, do something. So adding more intelligence in a way, maybe adding another aspect, I would say.
Okay, interesting. It's still a bit abstract for me, so I can't wrap my head around it. But interesting. I'll come back and I'll think a little bit about that. Seamus, what's your take? Where's it going next?
There's so many things to talk about, but I'm going to pick two. I think that the user interface, the graphical user interface, I think that as we know it, that's probably going to go away. Certainly not be what we're familiar with now. If I'm going to use, I'm an RBC customer. Actually, I was just using my RBC mobile app. So I'm a long-time RBC user. And I could imagine very soon not even going into the app and just saying, could you transfer my son $20 for lunch? And it would just, to Leila's point, it would be able to not to plan on how to interact with the app itself. And I wouldn't even see it. It would just do it. That's a little bit away in terms of permission, but in terms of technology, it's not very far away at all. There's been a few companies that have replaced their CRMs, for example. And so instead of having a CRM at all, they simply have the data, and they just ask the data, can you produce a list of all my top customers and draft an email for them? Boop, it does it. There's no interface at all. There's no buttons to click. There's nothing. So I really feel like the way we interact with computers is going to be so different in a couple of years. I even suggested to a couple of clients that they were going to spend millions to redo their website. I said, don't bother. Like, just wait it out. In about 2 or 3 years, you might not even have a website. Or if you do have a website, it might be 2% of your traffic. You really should be thinking about, how do I integrate into the most common GPT models like ChatGPT and Claude and all of this, so that they sort of like SEO, like search engine optimization, so the models know how to interact with my data. So because that's where the users are going to be. The other thing beyond that, the user interface one, is really about where the models are. So Leila already touched on on-prem. I think the other one is sort of the edge models, like so on-device models. And Apple is going really big on this. So there's going to be an iPhone that has a chip specifically in it to be able to do this matrix multiplication, so that you can have a small model like baked in. And there's so much research figuring out how to take. I'm going to use a term from the 90s, supermodels. So take these supermodels, the ChatGPT for whatever model, and quantize it and make it really small and compress it essentially, and make it narrow to a domain. So I think there's going to be a toaster sold within a couple of years that has an LLM in it that you can tell it, I want it light brown, and it's going to know what light brown means from an image perspective. Or
maybe, as I think to Leila's point, maybe that's the planning. We'll already plan for you. Oh, it's the Monday long weekend, you probably want it light toasted today. And
so it's going to start with on the phone, because that's already a little supercomputer. But these models there's just so much work in getting them smaller and smaller and more efficient. Eventually, they're just going to be all over the place. Very much like the computer chip. Remember, first there was these big machines, and then suddenly there was a computer chip in every little kid's toy. I think that's what's basically going to happen.
Thank you. It's been super fascinating, and I wish we had more time, but we are actually approaching the end of the hour. So with that, I'm going to conclude here. So this concludes this Ivey Impact live session, Beyond ChatGPT, Integrating AI for Measurable Business Results. I hope you found it as interesting, stimulating, and entertaining as I have. I'd like to thank Leila Pishdad and Seamus Blackmore for taking time to speak to us and for sharing their insights and experiences. It's been truly fascinating. So thank you very, very much for coming and speaking to us and sharing your insights. Thanks, Seamus. Thanks, Leila.
You're very welcome.
I think my own personal key takeaway is that we are living in a very exciting time in history, a time in which we all get to shape the Gen AI revolution. And so, yes, there will be disruptions. Yes, there will be task transition and job realignment. And yes, it's not quite clear how this will all pan out. However, fundamentally, it's up to us, collectively as managers and business people, to decide and lead this revolution. AI and Gen AI are only tools, and the value of tools is strictly the value that we create for ourselves, society, and the environment we live in. I'd also like to thank the team at Ivey Communications and Events for putting this together, this Ivey Impact Live sessions, and a big thanks to the Ivey Tech team for assisting me with all the technology. The notes and recording of this session and hopefully some of those websites that were mentioned should be shared, so keep an eye out in your inbox. As you exit this webinar, we have a short survey, which we would really appreciate if you could please fill out. Finally, stay tuned for some exciting up-and-coming Ivey Impact live sessions. If you have a topic you'd like to hear more about, include that in your survey response. And if you're interested in the Gen AI specifically, and how it can augment or automate business tasks, I, with Ivey Academy, are hosting an online workshop called Accelerating Leadership with AI. The next session starts already on Thursday, November 14th, but there will be another one in the spring 2025. So you can visit Ivey Academy for more details. And with that, thank you and wish you all a great day.